Johnny Tremain, Chapter 6, Part 6. This is it, everyone. The moment we've been waiting for. But before we begin, allow me to ask you 5 questions to sort out this mess that's about to take place. 1. What is the nature of the specific task that Johnny is given in aid of the conspiracy? 2. What disguises do the boys use to disguise themselves? 3. What verbal, that would be with mouth and words, and physical, meaning with hand gestures, what verbal and physical signs and countersigns are used by these conspirators? 4. What exactly happens to the boats docked in Griffin's Wharf? And 5. How is Dove involved in all this, and what happens to him? Part 6. The Boston Tea Party. The next day, the 16th, Johnny woke to hear the rain drumming sadly on the roof, and soon enough, once more, he heard all the bells of Boston clanging, bidding the inhabitants come once more, and for the last time, to Old South, to demand the peaceful return of the ships to England. By nightfall, when the boys Rab had selected began silently to congregate in the office of the Observer, behind locked doors, the rain stopped. Many of them Johnny knew. When they started to assume their disguises, smooch their faces with soot, paint them with red paint, pull on nightcaps, old frocks, torn jackets, blankets with holes cut for their arms, they began giggling and laughing at each other. Rab could silence them with one look, however. No one passing outside the shop must guess that toward 20 boys at that moment were dressing themselves as Indians. Johnny had taken some pains with his costume. He had sewed for hours on the red blanket Mrs. Lorne had let him cut up, and he had a fine mop of feathers standing upright in the old knitted cap he would wear on his head. But when he started to put on his disguise, Rab said, "No, wait a minute." Then he divided the boys into 3 groups. Beside each ship at the wharf, they would find a band of men. "You," he said to one of the group of boys, "you will join the boarding party for the Dartmouth. You for the Eleanor. You for the Beaver." Each boy was to speak softly to the leader and say, "Me know you," for that was the countersign. They would know the 3 leaders because each of them would wear a white handkerchief about the neck and a red string about the right wrist. Then he turned to Johnny. "You can run faster than any of us. Somehow get to Old South Church. Mr. Roch will be back from begging once more the governor's permission for the ships to sail within a half hour. Now, Johnny, you are to listen to what Sam Adams says next. Look you. If Mr. Adams then says, 'Now may God help my country,' come back here. Then we will take off our disguises and each go home and say nothing. But if he says, 'This meeting can do nothing more to save the country,' you are to get out of that crowd as fast as you can, and as soon as you can get into Cornhill, begin to blow upon this silver whistle. Run as fast as you are able back here to me, and keep on blowing. I'll have boys posted in dark corners, close enough to the church, but outside the crowd. Maybe we'll hear you the first time you blow." About Old South, standing in the streets, inside the church, waiting for Roch to return with the very last appeal that would be made to the governor, was the greatest crowd Boston had ever seen. Thousands upon thousands. There was not a chance, not one, Johnny could ever squirm or wriggle his way inside. But he pushed and shoved until he stood close to one of the doors. Farther than this he could not go, unless he walked on people's heads. It was dark already. Josiah Quincy's voice rang out from within. I see the clouds roll and the lightning play, and to that God who rides the whirlwind and directs the storm, I commit my country. The words thrilled Johnny, but this was not what he was waiting for, and it was not Sam Adams speaking. He was bothered with only one thing. Quincy had a beautiful, carrying voice. It was one thing to hear him, and another Sam Adams, who did not speak well at all. The crowd made way for a chase. "Roch is back! Make way for Roch!" Mr. Roch passed close to Johnny. He was so young, he looked almost ready to cry. This was proof enough that the governor had still refused. Such a turmoil followed Roch's entry. Johnny could not hear any one particular voice. What chance had he of hearing Sam Adams's words? He had the whistle in his hand, but he was so jammed into the crowd about the door that he did not believe he would be able to get his hand to his mouth. "Silence!" That was Quincy again. "Silence! Silence! Mr. Adams will speak." Johnny twisted and turned and brought the whistle to his lips. And suddenly there was silence. Johnny guessed there were many in that crowd who, like himself, were hanging on those words. Seemingly, Mr. Adams was calmly accepting defeat, dismissing the meeting, for now he was saying, "This meeting can do nothing more to save the country." Johnny gave his first shrill blast on his whistle, and he heard whistles and cries, seemingly in all directions, Indian war whoops, and "Boston Harbor, a teapot tonight! Hurrah for Griffin's Wharf! Salt water tea! Hi, Mohawks, get your axes and pay no taxes!" Johnny was only afraid all would be over before Rab and his henchmen could get to the wharf. Still shrilling on the whistle, he fought and floundered against the tide of the crowd. It was sweeping toward Griffin's Wharf. He's struggling to get back to Salt Lane. Now he was afraid the others would have gone on without him. After all, Rab might have decided that Johnny's legs and ears were better than his hands, and deliberately let him do the work that best suited him. Johnny pushed open the door. Rab was alone. He had Johnny's blanket coat, his ridiculous befeathered knitted cap in his hands. "Quick," he said, and smooched his face with soot, drew a red line across his mouth, running from ear to ear. Johnny saw Rab's eyes through the mask of soot. They were glowing with that dark excitement he had seen but twice before. His lips were parted. His teeth looked sharp and white as an animal's. In spite of his calm demeanor, calm voice, he was charged and surcharged with a will to action, a readiness to take and enjoy any desperate chance. Rab had come terrifyingly alive. They flung themselves out of the shop. "Roundabout!" cried Rab. He meant they would get to the wharf by back alleys. "Come, follow me. Now we're really going to run." He flew up Salt Lane in the opposite direction from the waterfront. Now they were flinging themselves down back alleys, faster and faster. Once they had a glimpse of a blacksmith shop and other Indians clamoring for soot for their faces, now slipping over a backyard fence, now at last on the waterfront, C Street, Flounder Alley. They were running so fast it seemed more like a dream of flying than reality.